Okay, guys, welcome to another exercise. So this is exercise 3, right? And in exercise 3, we're gonna look at doing vector editing using Illustrator. Now, if you head on over to the website and you select exercise 3, there we go. You will see what we have on the plate for today. So we're going to learn how to convert a sketch using Illustrator. And Illustrator is an awesome tool for doing diagrams and creating vector content which can further be edited or manipulated, right? Of course, vector content is resolution independent, which is one of its major features. So what we're going to do today is we're going to take a sketch and we're going to convert that to vector using lines, symbols, arrows, and investigate some of the uses of Illustrator. So with that said, let's fire up Illustrator. Now, just like Photoshop, Illustrator will also give you a landing screen, and we're going to choose create new. Now, for this particular exercise, we are going to use a letter size document. So we're going to choose letter size, and we're going to be portrait, and everything else we will leave as default and choose create. Now, when you pull up Illustrator, you're going to notice some similarities with Photoshop. Now, we have already experimented with manipulating the user interface with Photoshop. Hence, we can apply some of the lessons learned to using Illustrator. So the first thing to notice is that things are pretty much the same. We do have our panels, or which is our detail tools located over here. We do have our tools, our general tools located over here, and we still have a control bar at the top, right? Along with our menus, and we are also showing statistics at the bottom of the page. So far most of these features seems to be aligned with what we notice in Photoshop. Now there are a few differences, and we're gonna explore that as we go along. Now the first thing to realize is our details area, which houses our panels. These are our specific tools. There are a couple options. Now we already know that we can see what panels to enable by using our window menu, and as you can see here, it would almost seem like Illustrator has just about the same amount of panels as Photoshop. Now, just like before, what we're going to do is we're going to pull out most of these panels, or we're going to pull them out, right? And these are panels that are minimized to icons. So remember, you are able to maximize your panel by clicking the maximize button, and then that's what you would get. But let's not worry about that now. Let us just pull out all of these panels. Now currently this is the default setup for Illustrator, which is called Essentials, right? And when you open Illustrator for the first time, a fresh installation of Illustrator, this is what you will see. And you can see these are the panels that they pretty much start you off with. Now, if you're using the newer version of Illustrator, there is a new panel that you will notice here called Properties, and another one called Libraries. Now these are just regular panels just like these other ones, so we're going to also pull them out, and we're going to pull out Libraries here. All right, now these are the same panels as you see here, they're just maximized. So if we minimize them, they turn into an icon. Now, right now we have basically dragged out all of the panels that you see here, and we're going to actually close these out. And we're simply just repeating what we had done with Photoshop. We're going to create our own set of panels and tools that we're going to use for this exercise. Most of the times, most of the panels that you start off with might not be the ones you would want to use. And depending on the task that you want to accomplish in Illustrator, you would use the panels that would be necessary for that task. Let's also pull out our tools menu as well, and we'll take a look at this tools menu in detail a bit more. Okay, so we're going to go to Window, and we're going to use our color panel, so we're going to open that up. We are also going to use our layers panel. We are going to use our stroke panel. We're also going to use our type. And when you go to type, we're going to enable character. And notice how when you open character, you actually get these three panels together. So this is actually character and paragraph and open type. We're going to leave open type for now. So we're going to use the character and paragraph panels. Okay, so these are the panels we're going to use. So what we're going to do now is we are going to expand these panels. So we're going to click on that's the expand button there, and that will expand out the panels. So we're going to expand out all of these other panels here. Okay, good. All right. There we go. And let us now dock them together. So we're going to dock paragraph and character. We're going to dock strokes and color. And we're going to dock the layers. Let us dock that below. Now notice when I move the layers panel below, it highlights there. So it actually attaches below stroke. And we're gonna carry character and paragraph together. So this is our own little custom panel setup here. And what we're gonna do is save this layout. So we're gonna go to Window. Then we're going to go to Workspace and then New Workspace, and we're going to call this layout DDM. Great. So now we have our workspace set up with the panels that we will use. Now, before we get going with our exercise, I want us to get familiar with how Illustrator functions, because there are some differences compared to that of Photoshop. Now, Illustrator also has a section for dealing with layers, right? As you can remember, with Photoshop, layers is what we use to control the different elements on our artboard. Now, let us, for example, use a tool that we also use in Photoshop. So I am going to use the rectangle tool here. Now, how this works is I click the tool once, and then I'm able to draw that tool, that shape on the artboard. Now, in Illustrator, this is called your artboard. In Photoshop, it's called, forgive me, in Illustrator, it's called your artboard, and in Photoshop, it's called your canvas. So that is just the terminology that Illustrator uses. Now, what you've seen here is that I have placed an object, a rectangle, on my artboard. Now, unlike Photoshop, Illustrator allows multiple objects to exist on individual layers. So let's do another example here. So if you remember how this works, so these indicators that you see here means that there are sub-tools located within the same region of this tool, just like with Photoshop. So what we're going to actually do is we are going to change this tool to the ellipse tool, and hence if we draw that shape now, we will get a circle. Now, an interesting note here is that both of these objects that we have drawn are on layer 1. In Photoshop, each of these would end up being on individual layers. However, in Illustrator, we can have multiple objects, as you can see here, on a single layer. So the rectangle is here and the ellipse is here, and we're able to actually manipulate them by selecting the ellipse here. And when you select the ellipse, notice that there is a little blue highlight that tells you that, hey, this is the element that's located on this layer that is highlighted. The same thing if I highlight the circle here, then notice that the blue highlight changes here to now say that I have the ellipse selected. Now both of these are located on layer 1, as you can see here. So anytime one of these are selected, layer 1 itself will also get a little highlight here to say that an object within layer 1 is selected. So this is how Illustrator works, where you can have multiple objects on the same layer. Now, to zoom in Illustrator, you do Alt and mouse wheel, and we can actually zoom all the way out, and you will notice that in Illustrator you have an additional boundary here in addition to your artboard here. Now in Illustrator you can use anywhere within this zone, but you cannot exceed the boundary here. Another interesting thing you might notice, and I'm going to hold Alt and mouse wheel to zoom back in, is that if I select this object here and if I just grab it by holding on to the edge here and drag it, then you notice that I can actually have objects outside of my artboard. Let me drag that outside. So this is why, if I zoom out, this area is known as your workspace. That's this area here. All of this area here is known as your workspace, and your artwork can be placed anywhere inside your workspace as long as you do not exceed the boundaries set here. Now naturally, if you decide to print your work, it will only print work that is located on your artboard, which is here. So think of your workspace as a table. You can place cuttings and clippings and tape and all sorts of things that you would use in your artwork on your table, but only what you put on your page is what really matters. And that is the nature of how Illustrator works, which you realize is very different from the canvas in Photoshop, where you're not allowed to go beyond the scope of your canvas in Photoshop. Okay, so let's zoom back in. So I'm holding Control and mouse wheel. Now to pan in Illustrator, I'm going to hold the space bar. And notice as I hold the space bar, you can see the icon changes to a hand. So you hold space bar and left click, and this is pretty much the same kind of feel as Photoshop. So far we've learned a couple of things about Illustrator. We realize that we can have multiple objects on one layer, and when we select an object, it's highlighted with the blue highlight here, and you can also see it highlighted here on your layers tab. Now there are two very important tools in Illustrator that really define Illustrator's uniqueness. There is the selection tools here. Now this is something that you would not have seen in Photoshop, or it is actually in Photoshop, but it's not front and center. And if you look here, this is also another important aspect of Illustrator here. Now let us deal with the selection element first, right? So now notice in Illustrator there are two ways to select. You have the filled arrow and the empty arrow. Now this tool here is known as your selection tool, and this tool here is known as your direct selection tool. So what does that do? Well, this is perhaps one of the most important things to understand about Illustrator. Now I'm just going to bring my rectangle a bit closer, and I'm going to zoom in here. Now notice that, there we go. Right now I'm on the selection tool, and the selection tool allows me to select objects. Now you might notice by default you jump to the selection tool. However, there is also a direct selection tool, Now the selection tool allows you to select an object as a whole. So for example, I have two objects here, and I can select this object, or I can select that object. However, the direct selection tool allows you to select the lines and anchors that make up a particular object. So for example, I can select, if I hover over these lines, you will notice that they are actually highlighted. And I can actually select the anchor point here, and then I can click and hold and drag and move that anchor point. So I can actually deform the shape. Now if I'm on the selection tool, I'm not able to select that direct anchor. I'm only able to select the entire object. And that's the main difference with these tools. The direct selection tool allows you to go into the lines and anchors that make up an object, and it allows you to manipulate them. So for example, I can select this point here and I can drag it. I can even select a line and I can drag it. Or I can actually select all of these points by holding down the shift key, and I can move 2 points at once. Or I could select everything here by dragging a box and move all the points at once. Now the same thing for the circle. I can actually select the points that make up the circle. Now when I select the circle, you will notice that some additional things come up. I get some handles here and here. Now when I select these angles, I can actually move them around, and it will actually deform the shape. And that's because these curves are called Bezier curves. Now, while I'm manipulating this, I want you to notice something, that no matter how much I zoom in, these lines are always 100% sharp. And that is because Illustrator is not using pixel to show its artwork, but instead it's using a combination of algorithms. It's using a combination of algorithms of which to display the artwork. So because of that, I can manipulate these handles and it would actually change or manipulate the anchors that make up an object. Now the next thing to understand about Illustrator is that every object that exists in Illustrator, every vector object, will have a fill color and a stroke color. This shape that we're looking on now, the fill color is white and the stroke color is black. And essentially these are all that makes up a vector, right? It has to have a stroke and it has to have a fill. So for example, if I change the fill color by double clicking it, choose OK, then it will change. Now notice it changes here, but it does not changes here. And the reason for that is that actually we have nothing selected. If you look at our layers here, you also realize that it does not say that we have selected anything. So what we're changing here now, it's just, arbitrary. We're not actually changing an object that is selected. Now notice that when I click the object, now it says that you have selected a path, and it also gives you an indicator over here that says, hey, I have selected this object. There is my indicator right there. So in Illustrator, it is important to always select your object. Now notice when I select the object, this goes back to white as shown here, and the stroke, which is the edge of this here, goes back to black. However, now that I have the object selected, if I double click here, then I'm able to now change the fill color. And if I double click the stroke, I'm able to now change the stroke color. Let's change that to something that we can recognize, like some kind of blue. There we go. And pretty much that is all that makes up a vector. Now I want you guys to try this out. If, let's say for example, let's use the other shape that we have here. Now in this case, actually that is, here it is, that's this shape that we have here. Now in this case, if I click on this object, I want you to notice what happens. Again, it shows me how I have my fill and my stroke organized, where the black is the stroke and the fill on the inside is the white here. Now it also tells me that I have a path selected, and it also tells me that I have this object selected on this layer. So all of that information changes based on your selection, and this is an important point that I'm going to expand on right after this. But before we do that, let's just experiment with this a little bit, just to kind of digest how this thing works. Again, if I double click on the stroke and I change it to a color and I choose OK, then the stroke will change. Remember, I do have to have my object selected. And if I double click on the fill and change the fill color, now the fill will change. Now if I click anywhere on the outside of my shape, then what will happen? Notice it will say I have nothing selected because I have clicked in an area that nothing is located. If I click on the object, then it will tell me I have a path selected. Now, remember, there are indeed two ways to select. So right now I have my direct selection tool highlighted. So that allows me to click on these anchors that actually make up the shape. However, if I use the selection tool instead, it will allow me to select the entire shape. Alright, so those are little things that we need to remember how Illustrator works. What you realize now is that you can be a bit more precise with Illustrator because it allows you to go, you know, within the object and manipulate it, and you can have multiple objects on a layer. So right now you might realize that, okay, so Illustrator gives me the ability to be more detailed. Now, there's also another thing to notice about how Illustrator selects objects. Now the way how your control bar works, right? Now when I say control bar, I'm talking about this bar up top. This control bar works based on what is selected, not based on the tool. Now if you remember, in Photoshop, the tool that you select will determine what options you get up top. That is not so in Illustrator, right? In Photoshop, the tools determine the properties up here. Now in Illustrator, the object determines the properties. So what do I mean by that? Well, Currently, I have nothing selected. However, if I now select this object here, then notice immediately you get some additional options here, and it tells you that you have a path selected. It also tells you what colors is applied to your path. It tells you the thickness of the lines, the type of line, the opacity, and the alignment, and some transform options. So all of these options that are located here are all based on this object here. And how do I know that? Well, check it out. If I change the stroke up here while this object is selected, then notice that the stroke gets bigger. So you can see that all of these properties up top are really based on the object that is selected. So for example, if I should zoom out a bit here and I should select the other shape that we had here, then notice again that the options up here change. Now, most of these elements didn't change, but what changed was the thickness of the lines and of course the color. All right, so let me choose the next one. See, notice it changed again. And if I choose back this one, then it changed. So right away you can notice the properties on your control bar up here changes based on whatever you have selected. So let's try something else for good measure. What if I use the text tool here? So that's the text tool here. And what I'm going to do is click the text tool and I'm going to type my name. All right, good. Now I'm going to go to my selection tool, which allows me to select these different objects. Now, notice that when I select the name, there is a new object added to my layer. And you can see the name here, and you can also see the dot there to tell you that it's selected. Now, additionally, it's telling me that, hey, what do I have selected? I have selected a type, right? Meaning like typography, I've selected a type. And it also tells me that the text is black. It has no outline here. But then it gives me some other options. For example, the font, the typeset. Then it also gives me the font size, the paragraph, and a couple other options here. So right away you can see that if I should now deselect by selecting a blank area, then the options up top change because I have nothing selected. And if I click back on this, then the options here change. So that's just something to keep in mind, that whatever you click on, these properties up top will change it. Okay, good. So now we've kind of learned how to manipulate ourselves in Illustrator. Now I'm going to zoom out a bit. And let's talk about this artboard for a while. Now we already realized that we can just put objects outside our artboard. However, if we print, we will not be able to, our artboard would have been blank because nothing is on the artboard. Now there is an actual artboard tool which is located here. And what this tool allows you to do, when you highlight it, it allows you to now change the size of your artboard. And in newer versions of Illustrator, it allows you to also change the name of your artboard. Notice the same thing again. When I have the artboard selected, if you look at the properties up top, These are all properties that are related to the artboard. So look at the size is letter size. The name of the artboard is artboard 1. And these are, the location that it is in your workspace, whether it is portrait or landscape. And it tells me that I have my artboard selected. Now, a key thing to realize is that I'm only able to select the artboard when I'm in artboard edit mode. So if I had selected my selection tool, notice that I can't select my artboard, and naturally so, because it would have been quite annoying to be accidentally moving your artboard around. Now, your artboard does not exist on a layer because it's not an object, really. Now, there are many other tools that you can see that's located in our tools here, and we may not get to all of them. There are quite a few fascinating tools as well, but let us get to perhaps one of the most important tools when using Illustrator, and that is the pen tool that's located here. So let's take the pen tool for a swing. So if I click on the pen tool, what the pen tool allows me to do is to draw a shape. Now, the important thing is to notice the symbols that are beside the pen tool. And when I say symbols, I'm really referring to the little star that you would see that's right beside the pen tool there, as you can see. Now, the star means that you are about to create a new shape. So I could create a new shape by clicking once there, click again there, click there, and notice that when I click again now, notice I'm getting a fill. Now I'm going to just close that shape up, and when I hover here, notice I get a little circle that tells me that I'm about to close the loop. Now, why did I get a red fill? Well, that's because my settings is currently set to a red fill, and it was set to that before I started to draw. Notice that because I have this shape selected, the stroke, which you can barely see, is this blue color here. Now, notice that I'm still on the pen tool because the pen tool is still highlighted. And while the pen tool is highlighted, if I hover over a point, I get a minus sign. And that minus sign is telling me that it is going to actually remove that point. If I hover over a line, notice I get a plus symbol, which says it's going to add a new point. And if I hover outside the shape, I get back the star, and of course that means I'm going to be drawing an entirely new shape. So those are the important symbols that you're to watch while you're using the pen tool. Now, if I wanted to manipulate the shape, then I would have to go to my direct selection tool, which would allow me to now select an individual point and then move it. Select the point first, then move. And it's a little tricky to move these points because they're so small. When you're trying to move a point, what you need to do is first select the point, release the mouse, then you click and drag. So let's try that out. Hover over the point, select it, release the mouse, and then try and drag. Oftentimes, if you try to select and drag it together, then you might end up moving the entire shape. So my suggestion is to select the point first and then move it. Now, for those of you who are using maybe CC 2015 and up, when you select a point, you notice that you get this little symbol here. And what this means, it can actually automatically round the point for you, like that. So that's a pretty cool feature as well. Now remember how this works. Illustrator works by whatever you select. The properties for whatever you select is going to be located up top. So the same is true when using the direct selection tool. Remember, the direct selection tool allows you to select these little individual points that make up these objects. And these individual points actually have their own properties. So for example, if I select this point here, then notice the kind of options that I'm getting here. Right? I can, for example, make this point a curve or at an angle. So this is me changing the properties of this individual point. So this is why Illustrator is so detailed, because you can actually change properties for literally everything. The line that you have here, the point that you have here, or the entire shape that you have here if you use the selection tool. Now, up until now, we have been using primarily our tools that's located here, and we've been using our control panel, which is located up here. Now notice we haven't even touched our panels here. And remember what panels are from Photoshop. These are actually specific tools. Now the truth of the matter is that the panels that you see up here, it's like a shortcut or a summarized version of the more detailed panels that you will see here. So what do I mean by that? Well, for example, if I select the character panel, then notice on the character panel I can see, you know, all of these elements that are here. But additionally, if I should select a text object, then notice that I actually get some of these options up top. So for example, I get the font. There it is there. There is the font there. I get the style of it. And I get the size of the font here. But then notice there are even other options that's located on this panel, and not all the options that you will see in your details panel is going to be located in your control panel up top. So what this is saying is that our control panel is kind of like a quick shortcut to change something. So if I want to change the color of perhaps this shape here, I can quickly change it up here. But if I wanted to get more color options, well, I would go to my color panel, and then I would have a much wider range of options available to me. Now, if you remember about panels from Photoshop, every panel has the ability, it has the title, it has the ability to expand or contract the panel. You can close the panel with the X there, and every panel has what you call panel options here. Now this is quite important, because what happened is that some panels are actually minimized, and there are more options that's located in the panel options. So let me give you an example. So let's say that I'm on the color panel now, right? Now in the color panel, my options are these. However, if I go to my panel options that's located here, I'm able to go to the show options. Let me carry this over. I'm able to go to my show options here. And when I click that, notice that my color panel has now expanded And I now have these additional options here, which is very useful. So every panel, or most panel, has the ability to expand into even further details. And if you look at these options here, none of these options exist to that level of detail on our control panel up top. So when you want more granular editing, you would need to go to your panels to do that. Let's look at another option. So for example, if I go to my stroke panel here, and if we remember what strokes are, remember strokes is actually the outer part of the fill, right? So that's these outer parts here. Now when I go to my stroke panel, well, the only option I get would be this, which is simply just changing the width of the stroke. So for example, if I have this object selected here, I can increase the width of the stroke. As you can see, it's getting quite big there. Now, there are more options available to us, but we would need to access that using the panel options here. So we go to panel options, and then we go to show options. And voila, notice that the stroke panel now open up into a barrage of additional properties. Now this is one of the panels that we will be utilizing a lot for this exercise. So hence we want to get familiar with this. So just to kind of give you a preview of what some of these tools do, things like I could now choose how the corners of these strokes should be. It could be curved. Oh, remember you have to actually select the object, right? It could be curved, and you can kind of see where the corners are being curved, or it could be chamfered. You know, the stroke could be on the inside or on the outside of the shape, or in the center of the shape. Of course, I can set the width here. I can set to have a dash line. I can set the length of the dash. I can have an uneven dash line, so I can set the width of the gap. There we go. Additionally, I can choose even the line thickness. I can have a profile like this, where the line starts little, gets big, gets small again. Starts little, gets big, and gets small again. So, I mean, these are just some of the options, but the sheer level of adjustments that you can do is just breathtaking when it comes to line work. And this is the reason why Illustrator is pretty much the king of line work.